Alright, we got our shield down. Doing damage. Got her. We got this. Oh, nope, 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 nope. So you have to fight Penny Parker. She is famously one of the most difficult defenders in the game right now. Matter of fact, the last time I saw a poll held on who people liked to fight least, she topped it out in the number one spot. There are a lot of difficult things in her kit, and she is built specifically such that there are not a lot of obvious counters. So this video is going to be the first in a new series where I try and break down difficult defenders and give you the tools to defeat them under three broad sets of circumstances. Number one, when you can bring whoever you want to. We're going to talk about her ideal counters, many of which you've probably heard of already. Number two, when the node or pathing constraints or your roster mean that you don't have the ideal counters, who is the second string? Who's the next best bet who actually answers her kit, albeit maybe in a somewhat oblique way? And then finally, let's imagine that you are in Alliance War and she is on a shared node in front of you, and the person who brought all those counters we talked about in sections 1 and 2 itemed out. You have to get her down so that you guys can clear the map. How do you fight her with an actively bad counter? And so that's going to be what we talk about at the end of this video. So I will put timestamps in the description if you want to check out each of those individually, but first we're going to go over exactly what the challenge is in her kit. So the crux of the problem is that she can auto-block, and that she takes no damage while doing so. This is problematic because, as Kabam loves to remind us, the best way, and pretty much the only way, to win a fight is to reduce your opponent's hit points to 0 before your own hit points are reduced to 0. So we have to find some way to deal with the auto-block. Additionally, Penny directly counters some of the most popular methods of bypassing auto-block. True Strike, True Accuracy, True Sense, none of them work. Ability accuracy reduction also does not work. So real problems there. And then the other big issue is that when she auto-blocks, she does damage. So it's not just that you're not doing damage, you're taking damage. Remember, we want their hit points to hit 0 first. And then compounding that, as the fight goes on longer and longer and she throws more and more of these special ones, eventually those start throwing these power burn debuffs on you, and compounding on the power burn that you take when you auto block, you're now taking even more damage and losing even more power, making it that much harder to actually get your specials off and win the fight. So to go over the mechanics just a little bit, because they're going to inform all the counters we discuss, Penny can auto-block when her pink sync shield is active and when she has those blue spider sense charges. If she has both of those, no matter how many charges or how strong the shield is still, she can auto-block you. If either of those is missing, if her pink shield has been broken or she is out of blue charges, she cannot auto-block. So that should always be your focus when trying to do damage against her around the auto block, is getting rid of one of those two things. So the simplest and most famous group of counters for Penny are those who are simply immune to power burn. Venom Pool, Venom, Terrax, King Groot, all are fantastic for this. Red Goblin is technically also immune to power burn, but the bulk of his damage comes from incinerates, to which Penny is immune, so I do not recommend that matchup unless absolutely forced into it. But if you are, and you're willing to take the time, he does work. But all of the others are great because they can just hit into her block, and eventually she does lose the ability to auto-block, right? We'll get more into that later. But they can hit into her block and are not punished for doing so. So power burn immune champions, excellent. Another group that is really good for her is anyone with reliable access to unblockable. This is why you see so many people use like a charged Corvus Glaive against her, because he has those huge unblockable special twos, and when you land those, you are doing a bunch of damage she has no answer to. Also, somebody like potentially Shang-Chi, that's not the easiest fight in the world, but there are ways to keep him unblockable for most of the fight, and that will do the job. Additionally, it looks like Misty Knight, when she comes out, it doesn't look like it's going to be that hard to be unblockable almost the whole fight with her, so she's going to be a fantastic Penny counter. I have also used Cersei with great success against Penny because of those unblockable specials. And then you also technically do have Nick Fury in his second life, but you have to be really careful with this one because against an awakened Penny, Nick is unable to go into his second life safely and will just flat out die. So, unless you have some way of keeping him reliably unblockable while still in the decoy, or if you're starting the fight with his charge already gone, would not recommend Nick against Penny in most cases. So there is another method that is really fantastic, and that is to use the Magneto House of X pre-fight. Because one of the biggest issues with fighting Penny is that normally heavy attacks get around auto block. Penny specifically has text that says if you try to parry heavy her, she purifies the stun debuff from the parry mastery and then resists your heavy, and power burns you, takes no damage, and hurts you for trying. However, you can't purify a passive. You can only purify a debuff. And so, if you are using a hero or a metal champ that can take advantage of the guidance pre-fight from Magneto House of X, then as long as she is stunned by that passive stun, she cannot purify the stun, and you can hit into her freely. And then when she tries to auto block, she will lose her blue spider sense charges, and eventually you're going to be able to hit into her without worrying at all. And then there is, of course, the final category of ideal counters to Penny, which is just cheating by using Red Magneto, because he cannot be auto-blocked by metal champions. Now, she will power burn him when she tries to auto-block him, so you need to be careful with this one. That damage can add up. It can make it difficult to get to your Special 3, which is the primary way that Magneto wins fights. But if all you have to do is hit her enough times with basics, or, really avoid hitting into her block because it's a node-like explosive personality, Magneto can get the job done. So our second group here of champions where you can use them if you need to, but there are definitely some more challenges to the matchups than those first ones we talked about. First up, we talked about how if you can get around her purifying the stun, then you're good to go. So in my testing, Apocalypse has worked fantastically, and Storm Pyramid X actually does great as well, because what happens is Penny will try to purify the stun to auto-block, and then Storm replaces that with a passive stun, which allows her heavy to land. So either of those will work. You have to be careful because there's class disadvantage there. There are a number of other problems with Apocalypse, like most of his damage comes from specials that Penny can still auto-block if you haven't gotten her charges all the way down to 0. And Storm has the issue that if you throw specials and Penny's shield is not down, then you are still going to get auto-blocked and power burned, and Storm has a very difficult time actually taking Penny's shield down, because when you hit into Penny's block, she power locks you invisibly for a split second, and that removes Storm's Tempests. So if you are facing her with either of those two mutants and just relying on heavies, make sure that you can win the fight without needing to throw specials like that. Like, Storm X can just parry heavy to a Special 3 and do a ton of damage that way. That is a viable way of winning the fight, but it is not necessarily the most fluid. right? So another kind of second string option are those champions with very high modified attack. Because the way Penny's pink shield works is that the strength of it is based on her opponent's base attack. And if you can then get your attack value higher than where it started, you can break down her shield more quickly. So somebody like Odin, who starts the fight with a huge fury, can actually break down her shield extremely quickly. Venompool, who remember is also in that top tier because he's power burn immune, another one of the reasons he's so good against her, and another one of the reasons that cosmics in general are good against her, like Venom, Terrax, etc., are that through armor breaks, furies, or other means, they are able to do more damage than their base attack rating would imply. Venompool gains a ton of Furies. Venom also gains Furies. Terrax puts a ton of armor breaks on her. And King Groot also gains Furies and armor breaks, right? Like you're seeing a pattern. But even if you're using somebody who doesn't have the power burn immunity, you can still be very effective against Penny by having high modified attack. So Odin or Hercules, because he can do extra damage through his strength ability. Corvus, who remember also has the unblockable. You're seeing some patterns here across the groups. Because Corvus can crit through block, he does very well there. Shang-Chi can also crit through block. So while his unblockable is a little harder to maintain, the fact that he can also do good damage through block raises his stock a little bit. And then I also mentioned Cersei earlier. This is another reason she can do well, because she gains all those Furies. So anybody with a lot of modified attack can do really well here. Kingpin is another one if you're ramping him up properly. So I mentioned that one of our other problems when fighting Penny is the one that you saw in the opening clip here, and that is that when the fight goes on long enough, she can inflict a power burn debuff on you. So even if you have been doing everything you possibly can to play within the rules, to break down her shield, and do damage in those windows, eventually she is going to do a bunch of damage to you. And so you need a way to deal with that debuff, whether that's just winning the fight in time or by actually dealing with the debuff. So this is why skill champions like Mole Man, again, Shang-Chi, Kingpin, or even Ronan can be quite good against Penny. I've actually had very good results with Ronan because he can deal with the power burn debuff, and he can do bleed damage while hitting into her block. So those are two ways in which to kind of get around her kit. He's not power burn immune. He's not a cosmic. But this is the kind of thing you want to think about if your roster does not have any of those first string counters we talked about for Penny. Then start looking for anyone in your roster who can make certain parts of the fight easier so that you have time to deal with the rest of her kit. If you don't have to worry about dying to the power burn debuff, you have time to break down her shield normally and avoid the auto block that way. You may not have to deal with the power burn debuff if you have somebody with such high modified attack that they can break down the shield quickly and regularly and do a bunch of damage before the fight goes on too long. Either one will help. And then another category of champions that can work quite well as second string options. These are usually needed when there's something about the node that makes it difficult to use anyone else. Are champions that just do an absurd amount of damage with their basic attacks. So they can actually take her down within that window at the start of the fight before anybody has gained any power, so that she doesn't have her blue charges yet, or they only need to get her shield down once and then the fight is over. So for this, I'm thinking especially Nick Fury. We've assigned him for her before, and all he needs to do is land a few of those big bleeds and the fight's over. But you could also potentially use somebody like Black Widow Deadly Origin. It's not going to be the best time in the world taking the shield down, But once you do, the fight may be over quickly. Masacre would also be in this because he can do a lot of damage even to incinerate immunes, and the way he builds up to it is by doing good damage into block, so he kind of comes back to the modified attack group earlier. Again, there's a lot of overlap here. And then the final way in which I would say that you can get through Peni is just by using special threes, which means champions with a lot of power gain can do a really good job. So Hyperion, Vision Arcus, or Dragon Man can get through Peni because she just can't do anything about their special threes. Additionally, Hyperion and Arcus can both have high modified attack, either through Furies or armor breaks, and Dragon Man can go unblockable. So they all have pieces of their kit that remind you of those top tier options, and that's why they can do well in addition to the benefit you get from that power gain. Now, let's say you find yourself in that worst case scenario I outlined earlier. You know all of these things about how you're supposed to counter Peni by bringing someone who actually answers her kit. But you don't have that option because you're already in front of her and you need to do something to help. In this case, I have basically two broad sets of recommendations. Try to hit into her block whenever you can to get that shield down, and as much as you possibly can, push her to her special 2, and be prepared to block the entire thing. Because the special 1 will eventually lead to a power burn debuff. The special 3 automatically inflicts a power burn debuff, even if you use an invulnerability boost. The special 2 has a lot of hits and can hurt through block, but most of its damage is if it actually lands. So if you block it, it's really not that big a deal. You can at least get away with blocking a few of them and do real damage on the fight, right? Now, the way to try and push her to her special 2 is, as she is climbing up to a bar, try not to leave yourself too open. If she backs off and blocks, go ahead, run in, hit into her shield, but as much as possible, you're going to want to try to block and discourage the AI from throwing their specials. This isn't always easy. You may have to dodge a lot of heavies, and you may have to dance a little bit before you can eventually hit into her block enough to push her up to a special 2, or break her shield and then start hitting her freely to push her up to a special 2. But that should be your focus. Again, in this circumstance, you may lose the fight because you don't really have the tools. But if you don't have the tools, your best chances of winning are to focus on those two things. Now at this point I am going to mention, as far as I can tell, Peni is also currently bugged. And so you can take advantage of that to try and get past her that way. Now the way in which she is bugged is that, as far as I can tell, as long as she is not stunned with a debuff, she's not currently resisting heavies. So you can use a heavy to counter her own heavy or her special 1. There are pretty clear openings for both of them. Matter of fact, I think there's actually a pretty good opening for a heavy after her special 2 as well, if you're trying to follow that advice. But for any of those, if you throw a heavy right now, it will say auto block, but you will not get power burned, and it will use up her charges, and the heavy will actually connect. It's kind of the same effect as if you had used the House of X pre-fight. Should it work this way? Absolutely not. But at the moment it seems to. And so if you find yourself in one of these situations before this comes up in a future set of patch notes, then keep that in mind, and it just may get you out of the fight alive. So that's kind of the whole deal with Peni Parker. She is a difficult defender, but hopefully you got the impression from me listing all of these different champions that do have some advantages against her, that she has more counters than are immediately obvious. And as long as you are aware of why different champions are counters, then whoever you end up using should have better results against her because you know which parts of your kit and her kit to lean into to get the best results. So good luck with all of your Penny fights out there. Let me know in the comments if you have any other tips for fighting Penny that I didn't cover, and let me know who you'd like me to cover in this series in the future. Who really gives you trouble? Additionally, if you'd like to make it easier for me to make this kind of video in the future, then I would ask you to consider subscribing if you haven't yet, and if you have, maybe consider becoming a member of the channel. There are perks involved at every tier, and the costs aren't that high, and it would really mean the world to me and make this whole process that much easier. But regardless, thank you so much for being here, for watching, and until next time, take care.